Hey guys, my name is Hannah Richardson, and I am going to be summarizing Chapter 17, Positive Reinforcement at Home and in the School, in Sidman's Coercion and its Fallout. So, to begin, as this chapter suggests, Sidman goes a little more into detail on positive reinforcement in regards to its use in the home and at school. We've already talked about this quite a bit, just the use of positive reinforcement in general. And as we already know, positive reinforcement is essentially positively reinforcing a behavior. Oftentimes, when we think of positive reinforcement, we think of it as using a reward for a child or person because of something good that they have done. However, Sidman points out in this chapter that when used incorrectly, as positive reinforcement often is, positive reinforcement has the capabilities of actually transforming a child from a lovable bundle of joy to a monster, as he puts it. So, if a child is positively reinforced for behaving poorly, we can assume that they are going to repeat that undesired behavior. I mean, after all, why wouldn't they? When they just got reinforced for doing so, right? So, this is why Sidman explains that contingencies must be set and maintained. Because after all, positive reinforcement is contingent on behavior, right? And therefore, it must hold some consistency when we are implementing it. If it does not hold consistency when implementing it, then what reinforcers are really there to encourage the behavior we're wanting, right? If we're only reinforcing a behavior sometimes, is it going to be as effective as if we are always reinforcing that behavior and maybe ignoring some of the other ones, right? So whether this be at home or schools, I know that I can say I'm a culprit of it for sure. I'm a special education teacher at a middle school, and one example I can kind of think of, as far as consistency goes at least, is that in my school district we have a federal mandate to wear masks in schools. No student or staff is allowed in the schools without a mask on, because a federal judge said we had to do that. So as you can imagine, mandating masks is hard, as you all are well aware, in our society and where we're living and just this world we're living in now. But as I'm sure you can also imagine, mandating masks in a middle school with 11 to 13-year-olds is even harder, if not almost impossible, honestly. And mandating them to wear those masks appropriately is honestly next to impossible. I work at a school for a middle school, and we have 1,500 students, 6th, 7th, and 8th. We have 1,500 students, which is a lot of students. And so it basically has come down to, there's not really a lot of differentiation between students who are doing what they're supposed to. They're coming to school, they're wearing their mask appropriately per the federal order, and then students who are wearing it on their chin. And, as staff, we've been told you've got to positively reinforce the students who are doing it correctly, and then we have to, of course, we're supposed to punish the ones who aren't. But honestly, there's really no differentiation, and because of that, we're not really seeing a change in behavior. As a matter of fact, well, we are seeing a change in behavior, but the change of behavior is not what we want. More and more students are choosing to not follow this law, because why would they? Why would they when the students doing what they're supposed to? Like, yeah, they're being positively reinforced, kind of, but the students who aren't doing what they're supposed to are getting the same kind of positive reinforcements, basically. So Sidman goes on to say that, positive reinforcement is a relationship-based approach, right? When used appropriately, it builds relationship. And although there might still be misbehaviors, although there might still be misbehaviors, those are going to be less and less. They're going to become more and more infrequent, basically. So positive reinforcement is relationship-based. So when looking specifically at the school, Schools are pretty notorious for talking about positive reinforcement, at least in my experience, for, preaching positive reinforcement, PBIS, positive behavior intervention support. That's what my school does. But the thing is, when it comes down to the nitty gritty and the actual implementation, in my experience, again, they're pretty terrible. Punishment takes control. And the reality is, like, punishment should be decreasing if we're using positive reinforcement in the correct way, right? So, Sidman goes on, he talks about, how positive reinforcement basically, it should allow us to have more successful learning happening. Students who are successful are going to behave better, and vice versa. Students who act out, a lot of times those are the students who are unsuccessful in learning. They're struggling, they're having difficulty, and a big part of that is, as teachers, we tend to positively reinforce the students at the top of our class. They get all the praise, they're doing the best, and then students who are lower on the totem pole, whether that be grades or whatever it is, they tend to receive a lot more punishment or negative reinforcement. They tend to receive a lot of the brunt of the coercion. Your grades, you're failing this class. If you don't bring that grade up, then you're not going to get to go to recess. If you don't bring that grade up, then you're not going to get to go to the pizza party. We use negative reinforcement, we use coercion, punishment to try to bring these kids up to par with learning, when really, if we were teaching them effectively and we were implementing positive reinforcement consistently, wouldn't these behaviors go down and wouldn't their learning be more successful? So that's a little bit of what Sidman is talking about. Teachers, he says, teachers do have fewer opportunities to give that positive reinforcement. And I do think that's true. For myself, I think I have a lot more opportunities than most teachers, because I'm a special ed teacher and I tend to work in smaller groups. But for teachers in the gen ed setting, they've got 30 kids in their class. And that's not always possible. So that's kind of at the school level, and just looking at how disciplining, how positive reinforcement, how punishment negatively affects our students and their learning. So as far as at home, he talks about kind of the same, for parents who, sorry, my cat was attacking me. So at home, for parents who don't properly discipline their kids are likely to act out. Why? They're the kids that Sidman describes as spoiled brats, that become entitled when they're older. They expect everything to be done for them, right? Because they had no discipline. They were positively reinforced for everything, regardless of what behavior it was. And the reality is that positive reinforcement is contingent on behavior. And if it's contingent on behavior, we need to have specific contingencies of that behavior. And if you don't, then positive reinforcement is not really working. So, knowing all of that, I know that I come from the background of a school. I don't have a ton of experience, with positive reinforcement in my home specifically, because I don't have kids. But knowing that, I guess something that is interesting to me working in a school and seeing firsthand, how often negative reinforcement is used and punishment is used. My question to you all, and you may not have the answer to this, which is fine, but my question is, how can we utilize, okay, sorry. So my question for you all is, what are a couple ways that you think schools could implement positive reinforcement more successfully? I know that some of you don't work in schools, and that's okay. We've all been through the school system, um, and a lot of you work in settings that might be similar to schools. So, what are some ways that you think we could more successfully implement positive reinforcement in the classroom? Anyways, I'm excited to discuss with you all. Thanks for listening.